I know very few therapists who feel great about their notes. It's something that most of us feel insecure about. We're not really taught to write notes in graduate school. We learn to write progress notes based on our internship placement. And it might be that they do note taking in a very specific way, or it might be that they're not really focused on that and you're not getting a lot of guidance. It's okay. Take a class or talk to a more experienced colleague, and that way you can figure out a plan, a type of note that works for you that you can feel good about and stay on top of. Welcome to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. This episode is sponsored by the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. Hi, I'm Janine Wolfe, and I'm your colleague down the hall. I have a passion for helping fellow therapists get the clinical and collegial support we all need to do this work. And wow, it just keeps getting harder every day. I'm the founder and facilitator of the Collab Oasis Clinical Consultation Groups. I have been a social worker for almost 30 years, and I own a successful solo online private practice. More of us than ever are practicing in solo or online practices, and we all need colleagues to process cases with, commiserate with on those really hard days, and also to celebrate our successes with. In this podcast, I'll bring you insights about trends and changes in our field and sit down with amazing therapists who are doing amazing work. We'll discuss fictionalized cases, ways to practice sustainably, and of course, there will be plenty of laughing. I love laughing with friends. I'm so glad to have you as one of my colleagues down the hall. Hello, everyone. You are listening to another episode of the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. I'm your host, Janine Wolfe. I talk to lots and lots of therapists who struggle with incorporating the things that they learned in graduate school, along with the things that they are doing in their real life as therapists and as people. Today, we're going to talk about how we can be therapists and still be aligned with who we are as people. Grad school taught us so many things that are important in theory and are great guidelines for ethical and legal decision-making, but there are also many, many gray areas in our work. We are taught that we need to show up as a therapist as a blank slate. And I think that's a good premise to get started from, but it doesn't really work that way in real life. We have our own values and ideals which show up in the therapy room. How you manage those things is important, and there are lots of resources to help, such as your licensing laws, your liability insurance company, and other therapists. But the best way to work with some of these issues is through a clinical consultation group. That's where you're talking to your peers, and hopefully these are people that you've gotten to know and trust, where you can really be down to earth about the things that are showing up for you inwardly, but also the things that are happening in the therapy room that don't go as planned. If you don't know this as a therapist, we all make mistakes. We set the bar really, really high for ourselves, but we're not going to do it perfectly every time. And there are going to be times that we do something that we are cringy about later, and that's okay because there are ways to recover from that. We are taught to explore our own values in graduate school, but we also need to continue working with that postgraduate school. Especially since 2020, our world has changed so much, and we are dealing with so many deep issues in our world. And our world is ever changing. And so we work with real life human beings who are also changing. And so we need to take a look at how our own values and who we are as people is impacted by what's going on in our world, and figuring out where we stand on those things so that we can be more prepared in the therapy room. Imposter syndrome is real. We are not trained that it occurs or how to deal with it. Trust me, if you've been a therapist for a while, you know that it occurs. It's not something we talk about at all. But if you are able to sit down with a trusted colleague and share some of your experiences with imposter syndrome, you're going to quickly realize that we all experience it. Burnout also is real, and we need support. It has to be an ongoing part of your life and not cliche forms of self-care like taking a bubble bath. We also have to have a good work-life balance. And again, your peers can be a great way to have somebody keep an eye on you. We don't necessarily see that very well for ourselves. But if you think about it, we do see colleagues who are working too hard, who aren't taking enough time off, who just look downright exhausted. And it's important to have someone who can say, "Hey, I'm noticing that it's been some time since you've had any time off." Or I wonder if you're seeing too many clients, or I'm wondering if you're seeing too many clients in a day or back to back. Let's talk about how you can have some work life balance so that you can do work that's sustainable. Our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Seek out supervision, find supportive colleagues. I'm using the word supportive colleagues intentionally because not everyone is supportive, especially in social media groups for therapists such as Facebook and Instagram. We see people behind screens who are not behaving at their best, and they're not certainly not behaving professionally. And so it's important that we find people who can gently challenge us or offer suggestions or provide some good feedback to us that aren't going to judge us or shame monger us. You will get behind on progress notes at some point. I know very few therapists who feel great about their notes. It's something that most of us feel insecure about. We're not really taught to write notes in graduate school. We learn to write progress notes based on our internship placement. And it might be that they do note taking in a very specific way, or it might be that they're not really focused on that and you're not getting a lot of guidance. It's okay. Take a class or talk to a more experienced colleague, and that way you can figure out a plan, a type of note that works for you that you can feel good about and stay on top of. Consumers are getting really savvy about how to choose the right therapist, and I think this is a great thing. We need to encourage consumers to understand that they can select a therapist based on aspects of a therapist that align with them. If they're looking for a Christian therapist, an LGBTQ therapist, a BIPOC therapist, a therapist who has had life experiences that align with what they're looking for in therapy. Along with that, we need to understand that it's okay to dress in a way that represents us. If you work for a group practice or for community mental health or some type of an agency, there might be a dress code and you may not have a lot of choice about it. But if you are in private practice, people are looking for someone who looks like themselves. Pink hair, no problem. Tattoos, that's great. Ripped jeans, the teens are going to love that. So show up in a way that represents who you are and your therapy style. And that means marketing in that same way. We're also not taught that we have choices in who we serve. We have rights of as a person, our race, our identity. Those are things that will come up in the therapy room. And it's appalling, but a realistic fact that some clients will come in and they will insult something that is clearly a part of the therapist's life or their identity. We don't have to work with those clients. We can say, it appears that I'm not the right therapist for you. Let's talk about how I can help you find a therapist who's going to be a better fit. You can ethically refer someone out as long as you do it appropriately. You need to give them advance notice. You need to help them have at least 3 other therapists is sort of the general guideline, 3 other therapists that you can refer them to and pass along those referrals to that person. And then document the conversation in your notes and document the referrals that were given. It's a scary thing to do, and the clients may not be thrilled about it. But if somebody is insulting your humanity, your values, who you are as a person, it's not okay to feel like you have to sit there in that room and be a blank slate. It's also really important if you're considering referring someone out, that you want to make sure you're getting consultation around this. This can be an area of growth for you, or you might truly need to refer out. I've talked with therapists who were thinking they needed to refer out a client, and upon further review, it turns out that they were really the right therapist for this client, but they were moving into a growth place where they needed some more training or they needed some more consultation or supervision around this, and they could continue working with this client, but their imposter syndrome was telling them that they couldn't. Sometimes in consultation groups, we say, you absolutely do need to refer this person out. And we understand why you're struggling with this. So let's help you talk through what you want to say to that client, how you want to document that. Let's talk about making this happen for you. Because in the end, if we truly need to refer out a client, that client is going to be seeing a therapist who can provide them with such better treatment and sometimes, a lot of times, that client is going to be the other therapist ideal client. So, of course, they're going to do really great work with that person. I want to encourage you to follow your instincts when accepting a client if you have a choice. Again, if you work at a group practice or if you work at an agency, you may not have that choice. But if you are working for yourself in private practice or with a group practice that supports it, think about the clients that you do your really best work with. Think about those clients that you feel energized with at the end of the day. Think about those clients that drain you and you feel exhausted and you never feel like you have a good session. That's a really easy way to start figuring out if you have a niche or a few niches. And make a list of those at the end of the day or after a session. Take some notes, jot those things down. And once you start figuring out what the clients that really energize you and that you work really well with, what they have in common, then start taking notes about what are common phrases that are coming up in their sessions. What are some keywords that people are saying over and over? Those are the ways you're going to start marketing that niche. You can and most likely will change that niche over time, and that's okay. When we find that we have new interest in working with a different client group, that's okay. Then you shift your marketing to start working for those people. As long as you understand that you need to continue working with the clients that you brought in, or again, we go back to if you feel like you're no longer working effectively with those clients, then make sure that you're ethically referring them out. You can change your schedule. Again, we're humans and things happen in our lives. We might have kids' schedules that are impacting our schedules, training courses we want to take, hobbies that start at a certain time of day. When I started, I worked later into the evening. I worked really long days, but over time, I realized I wasn't doing my best work in the evening, and I was having a lot of resentment about not being home with my family earlier in the evening. And there are times that I've shifted clients to in a different appointment spot because I had a training that was really important that I take that was at the same time that I saw that client. And let me tell you, when those things happen, we lose sleep over it. We want to be perfect for our clients. But my experience has been most of the time the clients are like, okay, that's fine. It's not a big deal to them. They understand that we're humans and that we have lives. Choosing to take insurance or not is a personal decision. It's a values-based decision. It can be. For myself, I started out in solo private practice taking all the insurances. And then I realized that there were financial things coming up for me that were distressing. I was realizing that certain clients were getting paid. I was getting paid a lot more to see, and there were some that I was getting barely paid at all. And even though I didn't want to believe that that was going to show up in the room, it really did. I was ashamed and upset about it, but I realized I was also in a position to make changes about that. So I looked at the insurances I was taking and the reimbursement rates and the people that were accepting were being people that were using those insurances. And I realized that there were three that really aligned with my goals and values. And also I could work really well with, and they were providing a reimbursement that I was comfortable with. So I went off those other panels. So not only am I working with insurances that tend to have clients that I work really great with, but I also have room to bring on some private pay clients for people who really want to work with me, but I don't accept their insurance. It's okay to do this. It's okay to make more money in private practice than you would if you were completely insurance based. There are a lot of therapists who are doing just fine with fully insurance based practices. There are also therapists doing really fine with private pay practices only. And then there's the hybrid model where you do some of both. It's up to you to decide what you want to do about this. And I want to remind you that insurance companies have created this dilemma. So don't take on guilt caused by a broken system that prevents you from being able to pay your bills, save for retirement, or take time off. If you are self-employed or 1099, you only get paid when you're actually sitting in front of a client. So working with insurance companies that aren't adequately reimbursing you means that you are going to have to make hard decisions like, I'm really sick today. I really need to not see clients, but I'm not going to be able to get paid for this client if I cancel the session. And I'm not getting paid enough as it is really to make ends meet. So how do I make this choice? Then you're stuck with the dilemma. Are you choosing client care over finances? None of us wants to be in that position. Whether or not you offer pro bono or reduced fee spots is also a values-based decision. If your private practice is struggling to make enough money for you to pay your bills, then it's probably not a wise business decision for you to be bringing on pro bono or reduced fee clients. It's okay to make sure that your practice is functioning really well before you bring that on. It's also okay to say, the way I want to give back to my community is not by providing therapy. I want to give back to my community by volunteering at a homeless shelter or working at an animal shelter. There's lots of different ways that we can give back, and it doesn't have to be with therapy services, and that's okay. I hope these thoughts have been helpful for you. These are things that we really don't discuss when we're talking to other therapists. There's a lot of shame about these areas, and we're afraid to bring them up because there are so many areas where, like I said earlier, you are going to face shame and judgment. And that's another reason why I really want to encourage you all to be in a clinical consultation group that is supportive and that you trust, with therapists that you can be vulnerable with, that you can talk to about the issues that you're facing, and who can help normalize some of the things you're experiencing. Because we are therapists, we set the bar really high. And that's also part of what we're taught in grad school, to show up our very best every single day. But we're also humans, and that's not going to happen. And that's okay too. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Colleague Down the Hall. New episodes drop every Thursday on all major platforms. Please remember, our work is hard, but it doesn't have to be lonely. Thank you so much for listening to the Colleague Down the Hall podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to colleaguedownthehall.com, where you'll be able to learn more about getting the clinical support you need and resources to help you work in a supported, sustainable way. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your therapy friends and colleagues. Subscribe to the podcast, and if you loved this episode, please leave a review.